You know what a crystal
Yes,
set is?
yes.
Oh, that's all right. He's
I
up
know
to
what a
date.
crystal
He's-
set is.
He's up to date. That's where I started.
Yes.
My father, at the age of 7, I think it was, my father gave me one before I went to boarding school
Yes.
to keep me out of trouble after lights out. So,
Oh, really?
yeah. So he taught me how to tune it in, and it gave me a love for. And then I found I could. So simple when I pulled it to bits to see what.
See how it works.
He being an engineer at heart, had an engineering flair which I had apparently inherited, and if anything, did anything I'm interested in, I thought I'd find out why. So anyhow, found out what made radios tick, crystal sets tick, and realised from people's junk piles that I could get wires out of those, coils out of those, and terminals out of those. And so I began going around heaps and getting the bits and putting them together for crystal sets, which I sold for 50 cents each. Five shillings each.
Okay.
That's a wonderful story. That's amazing.
And that was my first money-making hobby when I was 7 or 8 or 10 years old.
Yeah.
Did you sell many?
Hmm?
Did you sell many?
Oh, I can't remember.
Yes, you did sell some, because when the Order of Australia was in the paper, you got a letter from Tasmania from a boy who remembered you because of that crystal set he had.
Really?
And
Isn't that
another fellow
fantastic?
told us that he had to save up to buy, but he bought one. And I think you made a handsome profit on them.
Oh, 50 cents was a lot of money.
Oh, yeah. What years would that have been?
About 1932 or something.
Oh,
like
yeah,
that.
50 cents is
30
that's
something.
good pocket money.
So did you stay with amateur radio later on, or
Yes,
did you move?
yes.
Yeah.
I got, in fact, I'd put in for my licence. I had to turn 18 to get a licence.
16, I think.
16. What day did the war start? Because it was I was enrolled for the...
It was when the Japanese came into the war, which was, I think
So
was...
I'd have to look up my books to see what that was.
I think it was 14.
I was 17 or 18, and I'd actually booked in and paid my advance fee for becoming Australia's. I wanted to be Australia's youngest radio ham. And oh no, I remember crying when the news came out of the radio. All amateur radio is off the air for the duration.
Oh, no,
My whole life was built then, and this was my main interest in life.
Oh,
Boom, plop.
it all
But
went
you
to crash.
didn't keep it on after that.
No, I took up
No.
chemistry as a hobby instead, and then became a chemist.
You have led a very interesting life.
Looking back on it,
Yeah.
but something the kids don't understand these days. They had to just simply turn to computers at
That's right.
the age of 6 or whatever it is, and
Yeah.
they spend their lives on those. I think that's fantastic effort you've done up to date.
Thank you. Well, we hope the finished product is good.
Yeah.
But can I just get you to smile and just relax your forehead? No, just a bit like that. Just raise your eyes just a little bit. Yeah,
Just
that's
relax,
it.
relax.
That's it. I'm sorry, I'm asking him to do 3 things at once.
He's not relaxed.
Yeah, just relax. Just relax. Yeah, I'm not looking anymore.
Thank goodness.
It's tiring, I know. And with this, when you see me wiping it with my fingers, it's putting a very, very, it's the way I build up the colour. It's putting a very fine layer. And then it's only hitting some parts. And then the next layer, because all our skin tones, none of it is the one colour. There's lots of pinks and creams and blues and all sorts of colours in it. So it brings out the vibrance of the true flesh colour. And that's why when I was working on it at home, I thought, well, I'll just put in the basics, and then.
We're not really white people at all.
No, we're not, and yet a lot of people paint people as being white. But, you know, if you look at David's face there, he's got grey shadows, he's got blue shadows, he's got pinks and browns and yellows.
You can see green and...
Yeah, all colours.
Peer into it.
Yep. I know, I made the veins there much more prominent than they actually are sitting here. So I can tone them down big time. Just want to get these creases right. Character lines. I shouldn't call them creases, should I? They're character lines.
Sounds good.
They're character lines.
So what age were you when you lost your father, David?
34,
You're nearly 9, weren't you?
9.
Nearly 9, yeah.
Killed in one of Australia's first
Crash.
air today.
What was the first commercial airline
First commercial
disaster?
airline.
Is that DC2 or something?
I can't remember what it was, the aircraft.
I'll have to have a look.
Miss Hobart, I think it was called.
Yeah.
Yes, it was the Miss Hobart.
And did that inspire you later on to
No, I don't think it... people like to say it did.
yeah,
But
not really?
no, it was sheer accident that made me invent the black box.
Yeah.
That was the first crash of a jet coming on its way to Australia, and because they didn't have a clue, everybody lost their lives. There was no witnesses, no clue at all. Just at that stage, by sheer accident, and this is the way things happen in life, I had also, the same week, seen the world's first miniature wire recorder, which was a pocket recorder, a German Minifon, and I'd been fascinated with this because I was a swing fan, and I thought if I got one of those and I took it along to a Tommy Dorsey concert, I could record the whole concert and then probably sell the records afterwards to make up for the money, because it was big. It was $70 or something. Enormous price.
Expensive, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, David, it was pounds then, and it wasn't
pounds.
That's
70.
true, it was pounds.
And whatever it was. Anyhow, I put the two ideas together, and I thought, now, if somebody had one of these on the plane, we might solve this mystery, because we'd be able to get the records out of the junk, which they found the junk, but nobody alive and no records. We'd not only be able to have records, but with my knowledge of radio, put these three things together, I thought I could even make the recorder record what the instruments were reading by taking blip, 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 and recording this, and dots and dashes, which didn't come into the speech channel.
I think they already had recorders that did that for test purposes.
Oh, it could have been, but anyhow, I thought I could put it all on this. Well, I didn't use them for voice and everything, and I thought I could put the whole lot on voice. What made me confirm this idea was a later crash which occurred. Quite a few jets crashed in the first year of their use. In one of them, I was going to say, I forgot.
It was destined to come to Australia, but it was...
the first one was coming to Australia, it crashed.
Was that the Comet?
The Comet, yeah, Comet. And it's because nobody had could solve it in any way. I was wondering if anyone's... Oh yes, occasion occurred in one of these crashes where, while it wasn't a crash, but what had happened was somebody stood up in the main cabin of the plane,
yep,
and said, "Listen everybody, I have here a hand grenade. I'll pull the pin if the pilot doesn't take me to Cuba." Now,
That was happening back then even.
oh yeah,
Yes,
Golly.
this was the first occasion where it happened. Now everybody sit still, and the pilot's going to take me to Cuba or else I'll pull the pin. The pilot had no choice, so he went to Cuba, and nobody's lives were lost. And I put all these 3 or 4 ideas together by practice as a scientist, if you like, whatever it was I'd got used to by this stage, and put them all together and thought, right, if we fitted every plane with a recorder, which we needn't pay any interest in it until we have a crash, but out of the wreckage you could get what anybody had said, and if somebody had said, listen folks, sit still, I'll pull the pin, then you'd have a go and somebody yelling, grab him, grab him, grab him, bang, and you say, we have the clue. So I wrote my first report on that in 1952, 52 I think it was, and nobody paid any attention to it, the first scientific report on it. So we published it, asked for it to be published again and sent to all the people around the world who should be interested. Still nobody in the whole world replied, and for 5 years nobody took any interest in it at all. But then being a school teacher, I'd learned one of the secrets of good school teaching was don't just say, show. And this being a good principle to make people, keep people's interest up. So I thought the only thing to do to get this idea across, I'm sure it's a good idea, even though the world's ignored it now for 5 years, and I've written about 3 or 4 reports on it. Nobody's paid the interest, so I made one. And I took it up, I got permission from some of my friends in the aircraft industry to have a free seat on a plane here and there, and recorded what pilots were saying and what instruments were reading, and tried this thing out. And I had to work on it in my free time because even my official job as an aeronautical research scientist didn't include this. This was just a crazy idea. And the idea I got from my own bosses was, listen Dave, you're a chemist. For goodness sake, get on with it. They had forgotten I was also a radio ham, which you'll understand.
Yeah.
And so they said, get on with it. And all the authorities in the aircraft industry said, we don't have crashes in Australia, and we haven't had one for 10 years. And we had the world's best safety record at that stage, and we haven't had a crash for years. Forget it. If it was any good, the Americans had it. Leave it to them.
Oh,
and that was a standard, these were sort of standard answers I got used to.
Yeah.
And then, by sheer, can I go on with this story? It fills in the gap, doesn't it?
Oh, it's fascinating.
Yeah, go on,
Keep going.
And then one day, my boss, who at least didn't disapprove, but he couldn't approve it because it wasn't an official project, I was working on it in my lunch hour, in my spare time. And that was the only way I could work on it in government hours. So I was working on it, and he came in and said, listen Dave, I've got here a friend from England. He didn't tell me that the friend was nobody else but the chief.
He was an
Richardson.
air marshal during the
Air
war,
Marshal.
I think, but he
Richard something.
Raymond.
Anyhow, he was in charge of the English Air Force all through the war, and very famous. But he now, he still was. He wasn't in charge of the Air Force, but he was still in the business. And Coombs didn't tell me, my boss didn't tell me who he was. He said, I've got here a friend from England, tell him what you're doing. So I explained that if we had this in a plane, if we put these into planes, and we did have a crash, we'd have the answer which we don't have at the moment. We'd have some of these crashes which are occurring all the time with jets and everything else, we'd have the answer to it. And I heard this fellow say, I say, Coombs, old chap, that's a damn good idea. Put that young lad on the next courier to England and we'll show him in London again.
Did you really?
And
How wonderful.
I thought, who's this man? What's he
And
talking
that's
about?
what that photo was when he returned from that trip.
What's he talking about? Well, we talk bullshit. You don't give tickets around the world for nothing. What's he talking about? And Coombs looked back and said, you heard what the man said, David? Get your passport ready. He's mad too. I couldn't understand it. And I remember the fascination of it. I'll never forget the staggering feeling of,
What are they going on
these are
about?
too
Yeah?
important.
Coombs was actually the chief superintendent of ARL.
In aeronautical research labs, a big
And
shot.
he on one occasion said to David, when he knew David was working on this in his laboratory, he said, "Don't you ever tell me what you're doing, because if you do tell me, I'll have to stop you."
Yes,
Really?
it's an unofficial-
That's an understanding
I can't
boss,
have
isn't
people
it?
doing their hobbies in spare time officially, but he thought it was at least good enough to tell his friend about and tell me not to tell anyone else. So the next thing I knew was passport, and Coombs had carefully, good man, worked out a theory to send me over to England on half a dozen other jobs, nothing to do with this at all, so that I could take this on the side without doing it. So I went off on a tour of England of complete disconnection with it. And when I got there, I found that they had this meeting planned in London, and the other fellow, Sir Richard Hardingham.
That's right.
Memories come back. Sir Richard Hardingham, I should remember him, he's one of my heroes. He'd arranged this meeting in England of all the big shots of aviation industry and the authorities, and I put on the demonstration, and they were fascinated, and I couldn't imagine anything more encouraging. So I came back through America, and even the Canadians showed a bit of interest, not the Americans. Don't think so, I can't remember now. But we tried America, but nothing great had happened. And I think that's when
They
the
just
photo...
plain weren't interested.
Yeah, just weren't interested. So, in other words, why would good inventions come out of Australia?
yeah.
A backward country,
Yeah.
natives and kangaroos.
I remember when we lived in England, when David did his PhD in England, when we were there, some old fellow said to me one day, "It's great to see you colonials coming back to the old country." I thought, "God, I'm no colonial."
She's not.
Came back to Australia.
Yeah.
Now, we still weren't particularly interested in Australia. I couldn't get any response here. They were a bit curious, and we won a few friends from the very pommy English approval that we got. But we didn't get any action until Australia had its first crash for 12 years, I think it was, and a local one. And they still didn't have a clue why. And at the Court of Inquiry, somebody from ARL got up and said, if you had one of these gadgets on, which we've got these suggestions for now for 12 years, or 10 years or something, if you'd had one of these, we'd have the answer. And the judge said, I say, that's a good idea. We'll make it
David, I
mandatory.
think you're getting that story a bit mixed up. Yeah, because that you wanted to say that in the court, and Coombs stopped you and said, we'll do it officially.
Oh yes, that's
And
right.
they did it officially behind the scenes.
Yeah,
So that when the judge came back to find
That's
his
right.
findings, he said, if you had had it then, because
Yeah.
he'd been in Coombs and
I'd forgotten
the
that.
the hierarchy of
Yeah,
the
that's right.
Australian.
Yeah.
So yes,
Team.
Coombs was an enthusiast even when he couldn't be, when he was originally in charge of it. So Australia became the first country in the world to make fitting of the recorders mandatory. And that's why we've now gone down in history as being the first people to produce a working model and the first people to make it mandatory fitting, which everybody now does all around the world. So that's the story. Now that's the end of my part of this tale, because I had no further action from there on.
Okay.
Just to listen to the tales that came back of every time they produced something useful and solved some accident. People used to pat me on the head and give me the various things around the house that we now enjoy their existence.